This particularly highlights the role of the clients with management responsibilities. This is important because unless you have management responsibilities properly assigned, you will face problems when you want to solve problems in your organizations. So management responsibilities should be properly assigned, and you should be dealing with clients who are having management responsibilities. Now, when you look at consulting, even in 1900s, systematic approach to solving management problems was being practiced by Frederick Taylor, one of the early pioneering work who had done pioneering work in management, Frederick Taylor. And some of the early work by people like Gantt, Gilbreth, they all centered on production management or industrial engineering. You should understand that in the 1900s, industrial activities were surging. Industrial revolution was in full swing. Industrial revolution started in the late 1700s, matured in the 1800s. Then you had very big factory manufacturing systems coming up all over the world in the 1900s, especially so in the modern world, like European production centers and American production centers. And as factories and manufacturing organizations began to grow, they also faced a lot of problems. If you think back about your history, you will understand at the turn of the century, 1900s, what was happening was you had a high labor presence in industrial activities. It was not so automated. You had to depend on labor, manual labor for many activities, although you were using steam and electricity in a very large way. Then after the 1900s, you also saw the advent of the internal combustion engine, IC engines, petrol and diesel engines. All this accelerated the manufacturing activities, and many of the corporations or organizations were huge. By the 1920s, you had already faced a world war, which actually accelerated manufacturing activities, although of a different nature, not of a protective nature. But still, it contributed to the increase in industrial activities. And by the 1940s, you had big organizations employing hundreds and thousands of people, even at one site itself. This was happening mostly around America and Europe. Asia was still backward. But by the 1930s, you had the Second World War, which again gave a fillip to manufacturing activities centered mostly on armament for the purpose of war. But many of the technology developments we see now has as their basis the developments in the 1940s, which were accelerated due to the World War. And along with that, there came a plethora of problems. As you all know, when organizations get big, when the manufacturing sites become huge, you definitely will face problems under different heads. For example, manufacturing efficiencies may suffer since you have only limited resources. This was one particular area which gained huge attention during the World Wars because you had only limited resources. You had to be very careful about how to use the resources. So efficiency improvements, productivity improvements, how you can use labor to produce more, how efficiently can you use your resources. All these questions were being posed by the organizations, the management of the different organizations, how to gain more markets, how to reach more areas. So all these questions had to be answered for these organizations to move forward. So one way in which these organizations attacked these problems was by using consultants. That is how consulting came into being as a discipline in itself. Mind you, consulting need not be limited to any particular area. In the 1900s, one area of consulting was engineering, industrial engineering. Another major area was financial consulting, because all this required capital. As we know, any kind of industrial activity requires a lot of capital. How to use capital more productively was one of the questions always being posed by industrialists. How well to use it. So financial management and financial consultants had a huge clientele. Even now you will see that finance is one of the big areas of consulting. And on the other side, you also saw a lot of developments in industrial engineering. For example, automation was to take off in a slight way, then it accelerated. In the 1950s and 60s, you had more and more automation. So how to do it properly was one of the early problems industrial engineers were looking at. Then how to make labor more efficient in their work was one of the perennial questions always studied by consultants. So the early work by people like Gantt, Gilbreth, they all centered on production management or industrial engineering. Okay, and the present day consultant is quite a different category compared to these pioneers. Specifically because you are expected to possess a wide range of skills. If you go through the works of Taylor or Gantt or Gilbreth, you will find that they were looking at the quantitative aspects and the qualitative aspects of management in specific areas. But today's consultants need to be much more broad-based. You have to have specific skills in specific areas, but to complement that, you should also have certain general skills. And you will also find that detailed and extensive studies need to be conducted by a consultant who has little by way of standard solutions, unlike, for example, say, a costing specialist. I hope you have understood the implication of this statement. Exactly what is meant here is when you are asked to be a consultant by a modern organization, they put forth a problem for you to tackle. Usually what happens is you will find that the problem is only on the surface they have touched. When you explore it more, you will understand that the underlying problem may be much more extensive, and that will require very detailed and extensive studies by the consultant. So that you cannot take a standard solution and say that you do this, your problem will be finished, your problem will be solved. So probably you may have to work on the different aspects of the problem, come out with a structured solution, which may take multiple stages of implementation. So unlike, say, for example, if you go to a chartered accountant and tell him or her that I have to file this statement, please help me, it is much easier. But in the modern day consulting, it may not be so easy. That is what is intended here. Now, what exactly is consulting? I will repeat. Management consulting has become a complex and interdisciplinary field for professionals. As we all know, almost all kinds of problems will require some kind of interdisciplinary efforts today. You will find that if somebody asks you for help in, say, solving an HR problem in a factory, when you go there and interact with the HR people, you will find that it also involves communication. It may involve some technical efficiency issues. It can also involve IT-based inputs. So you will find that, unlike in the earlier times, you will have to take up a lot of inputs. So it may not be possible for just a single person to understand the full problem well and come out with a comprehensive solution. So that is where interdisciplinary actions have to be thought about. Interdisciplinary solutions have to be put forth. So that is why management consulting has become a complex and interdisciplinary field for professionals. And the canvas on which management consultants work is very large. You may be looking at the costing aspects. You may have to study the efficiencies of different processes. You have to think about the human resource angles. You will have to manage the information flows. You will have to study the information flow. So the way in which we see the consulting problems is actually dependent on the organizations with which we interact and also the times in which we work, which makes it a fairly complex area. Now, the basic question again remains, why should we go for consulting? Before we discuss this, you can come up with your own opinion. Manu, can you start? Why do we require consulting?
Sorry, sir.
My question was, we have been discussing about the evolution of consulting.
Yes.
Question is, why do we require consulting? We may have our own experts. Most of the large organizations have their own experts. So why should they employ consultants? I will get back to you, Manu.
Yeah.
Think about it. Swati? Swati, you're there?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So what's your idea? Why should we think about consulting at all? Why not employ your own people with specialized knowledge or whatever?
To avoid personal bias.
Good. Good. To avoid personal bias. Very good. Clenita, you want to add to that? We have a very good response here. To avoid personal bias.
To identify the problems and find solution.
Even if you are in an organization, you should be able to do that, no? Do you require somebody from outside the organization?
They
You can
will be
justify.
expertise.
Huh?
Right expertise.
Right?
They will be right experts.
So you are looking at the expertise. Good. Another good response. So
Thank
one
you,
is
sir.
expertise. Okay. Anything else to add? Anybody can contribute. Yes, Fatima, you want to say something? We have two responses. One is avoiding personal bias. The second one is expertise. Fatima Afrin, you want to add to that? I can't hear you.